on me got me feeling like I can now. New era, I ain't looking for a handout. Hard work separate me, make me stand out. It separate me, make me stand out. Fans on me got me feeling like I can now. New era, I ain't looking for a handout. Hard work separate me, make me stand out. It separate me, make me stand out.
Y'all still got one more rotation left. So group 1 and group 4, y'all still have one more rotation. So we're gonna do the same thing. 3 seconds. Flip the back card. Look at it. All right, flip it back. Was that a picture or a word? That was a word, right? All right, so now you got to draw a picture of what that word is. Just draw a basketball.
No, look. It's a basketball going into a hoop.
Okay, so that's what you drew a picture of, a basketball going into a hoop. Okay, would y'all consider that accurate or not? It's not what you said, but the whole point of this was to kind of show the description, the communication, be descriptive in that communication part, even if it's a drawing, so that way that message gets drawn across. Who has one that's nowhere near what the picture you drew?
I started with like a cheerleading outfit.
Okay.
And then a ball with the net.
You said they drew a ball with a net?
No, they wrote a ball with net.
Okay.
Somebody tried to draw that.
What's the picture of? Okay.
And then somebody says soccer.
Okay.
And then they do a soccer ball.
So it started with a cheerleading outfit and it turned into soccer. What was the picture you drew?
A track. Like a track.
A track? And what was the last word that you got?
Scoreboard.
A scoreboard. Let's see the picture. Let's see the picture. Show us the picture you started with and then the end.
It was just like this. Somebody they was just drawing scoreboards from there.
Okay, so who else has one that's nowhere near what you started with?
Started with was this beautiful picture of Kobe Bryant shooting the basketball, right? It's a beautiful picture, as you can see.
So Kobe Bryant shooting a jump shot.
Right. And then somebody wrote basketball, and then somebody tried to draw a basketball hoop. I'm not sure why it doesn't have a backboard, but there's that one. And then somebody drew basketball again, so it said basketball again. And then somebody drew a basketball hoop without a net, so.
Or a rim.
Or a rim, nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, they tried their hardest.
Jump shot, that's what it was supposed to say at the end, not just a basketball with a hoop, right? So with all that being said, we're gonna kind of go in and evolve into the next part of what today is. Today's Tuesday. What do we do on Tuesdays? Lectures, I guess, but I don't really like the word lectures because we want this to be interactive. We want y'all to be involved with it. We have a dope special guest again today. Last Tuesday we spoke with who? David who? Takayas. What was his position with Vans? His current position?
Vice President and General Manager.
Over what? Over the Americas, North and South, right? All right, so today we have another dope special guest. I'm excited about it because when I looked into the topic, which is the legal aspect of what we're about to get into, I'm fairly a novice when it comes to that. So I'm interested in learning something new. We have one of your peers is going to come up and she wanted to introduce her when it's time. But before we get to that, everybody got their iPads out? So when you open it up and you get to your note page that you're using today, ask yourself this question, but answer it. What do you want to learn or what do you want to take away from this session today? Don't write those words, but think in your mind, what do you want to learn from this? From speaking and listening to Miss Adrienne, what is something that you want to take away from this session? And write that down. So as she's going, you can kind of think in your mind. If you need to afterwards, we can ask questions based off of that. But what do I want to learn? What do I want to take away? What do I want to gain from today's session with Miss Adrienne?
Hello. Yes, I can. Hi, y'all.
You guys can say hello. This is Jordan.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. So I'm Jordan Schweitzer. I do all of our social impact and partnership marketing for the Vans Americas team. So this was kind of a role that was founded in the last year so that we could really focus on all of our give backs, kind of work more strategically. So I do all of the marketing. I'm on our brand marketing team. Before this, I worked on the surf and snow team. But yeah, I've been working with Deontay and Jalen and Kevin and Chris to kind of make this program happen over the last year. And we're so excited to have you guys. And it's been an exciting, fun journey. So I'm excited to sit in over the next hour and hear as Miss Adrienne gives us some wonderful knowledge. So.
Hi, Miss Adrienne. Hi.
Hi.
My name's Valeria.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You too. Okay, so Miss Adrienne is the general counsel for Vans in the Americas and some of the Caribbean. She has a lot of diverse work experience. She's worked in multiple law firms for a federal judge and in multiple offices for general counsel roles. And she's also very interested in fashion design and has taken several courses related to fashion-related classes in the Parsons School of Design. That's all.
Thank you. All right, so I'm thrilled that you guys are all here, and I want this to be as informal as possible. So I want you to feel comfortable at any point. You can stop me, you can ask questions, whatever direction, or if you want to go in a different direction, we can do that too. What I thought I'd do today is just give you kind of an overview of what a lawyer does, kind of open your mind in terms of areas where you may not think that lawyers work, and then really give you a little background of kind of why we do what we do, and then you can answer any questions, like I said, at any point. Okay, so the first is kind of how do you become a lawyer in the United States? So generally, if you're going to become a lawyer, you have to go first to college and get your 4 years. It doesn't matter what your undergraduate degree is in. You could be an engineer, you could be an English major, you could do just about anything in terms of undergrad and become a lawyer. And then after you graduate from college, you go to law school, and then you take the bar in your state. And you might ask me what a bar is. A bar is just what I would say is a exam that we have to take as lawyers. So once we graduate from law school, we usually study for about 3 to 4 months straight. And then the exam depending on the state you're talking about, could be 3 to 5 days of 8-hour exams that deal with everything that we would probably need to know as lawyers. How do businesses work? What is the law regarding businesses? How does our Constitution work? How do we address real estate? All the things that you would think would be relevant, just if you wanted to kind of have an overall view of the law, we have to do that. And then if we graduate, we have what they call continuing education. So I have to continue to go back to school, if you will. I have to continue to take classes, and then I have to continue to pay fees to keep my license. So if I pass the bar, I get a license to say in that state that I can then practice. And the question would be, why do you need to have a license? Like, why can't you just go to law school? Why do you have to take the bar? And the answer is really because the license is what allows us to go into court. So when you've seen courthouses and you've seen state courthouses or federal courthouses, anybody can walk into those buildings. But if somebody is going to stand before a judge and basically advocate on behalf of anybody, they have to have an actual license to say that they are authorized to practice law. So the same way that a doctor has to have a license, or people who do hair have to have a license, we as lawyers have a license. And by getting that license, it says that we know what the rules of the court are, that we respect the rules of the court, and that we are going to preserve the rules of the court. So this is just a quick view of what goes on, I think, for you guys in Ohio. I thought I'd try to make it a little bit more relevant to you. But what you'll see is that you see there are green and yellow and orange. There are tiers in your court system. The one on the bottom is kind of like where you start. And then if you're not happy with the decision on that level, then you can appeal it to the Court of Appeals. And then if you don't like that, it can go to the Supreme Court. So every state, this is Ohio, but I could substitute Illinois, I could substitute California, New York. Every one of our 50 states has a system for their state as it relates to their courts. And then this is the structure for our federal courts. So you say, what is the difference between a federal court and a state court? State court is going to hear cases that are based on state law, and federal courts are going to hear things that are related to federal law. So you would say, what is the difference? Some things like, for instance, let's take an example that's real current. I know you've heard about a lot of the different rules that are taking place in terms of voting and those types of things in different parts of the country. If someone was going to challenge anything about those and say, I don't think that's right, I don't think they're constitutional, those were created by the states. And so therefore, if you're going to fight those laws, you're going to bring them initially in the state court as opposed to the federal court. The federal court generally addresses issues that we call as having federal jurisdiction. So to make that easy, it just means that the federal court has kind of drawn a circle around certain types of law that they think are better heard in the federal courts. And the federal courts generally used to be, I know you guys have heard of like the 1960s and different areas of desegregation and other things like that. All of those types of issues are usually fought in the federal courts. And most of the lawyers, or I should say judges in this system, are appointed for life. So it's kind of important. I think you probably heard in the news lately that Biden is thinking about appointing a Black woman to the Supreme Court. In this structure, she would be in the top court right underneath the box with the federal court system, meaning all of the courts below ultimately would appeal to her, and she and all the other judges in the Supreme Court are the final determinants of the law of the land. Okay, so I kind of raised the question of what do lawyers do? And I put these kind of TV shows because people have a tendency to think that lawyers are always in court, they're always standing before a judge, they're always objecting, and they're telling the court what should and should not be done. But in actuality, I wanted you to see that what we do generally as lawyers, we do, sometimes we're in court, sometimes we advise clients about their rights. We research the law so that we know what we're talking about to fight for different people. And generally, lawyers intersect with all parts of our lives. This picture I put up because you probably don't know all of the people on these pictures, but I wanted to highlight that there are a lot of lawyers who do a lot of things that you may not naturally think. For instance, this woman over here on the left, Sunny, is a woman on The View, and she's a lawyer. Of course, Michelle and Barack are lawyers. Adam Silver is the commissioner of the NBA. He's a lawyer. This guy right here is an attorney here in LA, and he represents her and ASAP Rocky and a lot of different entertainers. Down on the bottom is Kasim Reed. He's the mayor of Atlanta. And the woman up on the top is Tamika Tremiglio. And she is a recently appointed person who defends all of the NBA players against the owners. So I just want to highlight the fact that there's lots of different ways to be a lawyer, and everybody doesn't do the same thing. There's a lot of very expansive things like intersecting with music and politics and TV that you can do by being a lawyer. So again, just to highlight, everything that you could think of in terms of different businesses. You can be a law professor. The White House, the Department of Justice, FBI, CIA, all of them have lawyers. Most of your governors and cities have lawyers. All of our airlines, Amtrak, and all of our various areas of transportation have lawyers. NBA stars, entertainers, Fortune 500, small businesses, all of those particular businesses and the options that I've talked about all have lawyers, because at the end of the day, even I, at Vans, if we're trying to decide whether or not we're going to make a brand new shoe, I have to see whether or not the name that we want to use has been used by somebody else. If we want to make a claim that, you know, if you wear the shoe, you're going to jump higher than anybody else, I have to make sure that we've done the testing to be able to support that claim. If somebody says that they've worn our shoes and been hurt, I've got to be able to do the investigation to see whether or not they really do have a claim against Vans, or whether or not they're actually bringing a false claim, and what we need to do about that. So it's almost as if everything that you think of in your daily life, there's always generally an intersection of law and somebody who's working in a role to make sure that they're advising whoever their particular clients are. So I wanted to highlight also the fact that there's law even intersected in some things that you've heard in the news. I mean, I think all of you heard recently that Cardi B had a large verdict in her favor because someone had defamed her. I think she walked away with a considerable amount of money, like $3 or $4 billion. And that was a lawyer who was doing work for her. There was a lawyer who was working for Meghan Markle. There was a lawyer who set Britney free. And even there's some big cases where teachers were wrong because they were exposed to chemicals. That was a huge verdict. Or a girl was struck by a garbage truck and her family recovered $38 million. All these results are as a result of some legal work. And, you know, I wanted to highlight, like, people have a sense of what makes a good lawyer. And people tend to think this slide, that you have to be the loudest person in the room, that you have to love to argue, that you have to be a bully, or that you have to be aggressive. And even people who say not the nicest things, that you have to lie and cheat and steal to be a lawyer. But in reality, it's actually what I had before. These are the things that make a good lawyer: that you really have the ability to listen, that you really are creative in your thinking, that you can prioritize, that you are concise, that you work really hard, even that you know when to be quiet. And all of these things are important. For what reason? I'd like to hear from you guys. Why do you think these things are good to be a lawyer? Wait, did someone say something? I didn't hear anything.
No, I was telling somebody, go ahead, why? No, you gotta go closer because you know that mic. I believe to be a good lawyer, good listening helps, because you also have to listen to all your cases and see if your defendant is actually in the wrong or right.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly right. You have to be a very good listener, because if you think about it, it's the same as if somebody came to you either with a problem or looking for a solution. You have to really understand what they're asking to be able to try to come up with solutions that are relevant to them. Anybody else?
And I think you need to be trustworthy so that your defendant trusts you to work on their case in the first place.
Very good. Absolutely. And it could be, that was a great example. And it would be the same if one of the people in my company came to me. If I gave them an answer that isn't the right answer, then they're not going to be that excited about coming back to me for any answers that they might have in the future. So it's really important that they can trust you and that they can rely on your word in terms of anything that they're doing. So exactly right. And I want to highlight knows when to be quiet, because there's this kind of sense or a stereotype that lawyers have to be the loudest in the room. But in actuality, when things get very, very tense, it's incredibly important to be very quiet, to listen and be attentive to not only what you're seeing, but also what we call your emotional intelligence, that you're seeing how either body language or people's mannerisms, those things when you're assessing people's character are just as important as what they're saying to you. One time I was actually working with somebody and the answers she was giving me were just not making sense. And I finally said, let's stop this process. Just leave me and her in the room. I need to figure out what's going on. And in a little period of time, she started crying because she was concerned that what she was telling me, she was going to get in trouble with her boss. So I wasn't getting the right answer. So it's important to be able to listen to not only what is being said, but to be cognizant of everything else that's around you. So I don't think now it's questions. I don't know if you have questions more about lawyers, more about my path. I'm happy to answer anything.
I have one, Ms. Adrienne.
Okay.
Can you just kind of give us a little bit about your path, where you started from and how you got to where you are?
Sure. So I started, I think I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer when I was pretty young. I remember being at my kitchen table and I said that I wanted to be a lawyer, and my parents were thrilled, and it kind of took off from there. So I took Latin and some other things along the way that I thought would be helpful to me as a lawyer. But in actuality, I went to Northwestern University in Chicago, and I actually majored in political science and economics. And then I decided to go to Tulane Law School, which is in New Orleans. And when I finished that, I moved to Chicago, and I worked for a big law firm, and I took some cases to trial. So I was actually one of the attorneys who was in the courtroom, standing in front of the judge, basically everything from presenting motions, which is essentially presenting paper to the judge on behalf of whoever your client may be. And then after I did that for a couple of years, I worked for a federal judge, and that process is kind of, I think that was one of the best jobs I've had, because what you're essentially doing is you're standing behind the judge. No one really knows that you're behind the judge in the chambers behind where she's sitting. But a lot of the cases, she will sit in front of the parties and then she'll bring it back to you. And your job is to do all of the research and make a recommendation to her as to which way she should rule. So that was really exciting, because you get to see all kinds of cases. They're criminal cases, they're civil cases. Some have to do with very serious situations. Some are a little less serious. So it was just a really good experience to see all of the different kinds of cases that a judge could hear. And then at a certain point, I moved to New York. I worked for Avon and started off doing employment and labor. So I was basically handling all the employment and labor issues for the company. And then from there, I worked for a year or so on Wall Street. And then I ended up being a lawyer for Godiva Chocolates. And then I became a lawyer for Kenneth Cole Shoes. And then now I'm working at Vans. So I've always tried. I think what you'll find is there's so many different kinds of lawyers, and each of us has a different kind of passion. And for me, it's really important that I'm connected to kind of the product that I'm creating. And so for me, I'd like to be excited about the product that I'm working for. Other attorneys don't care as much about that. They might be more concerned about being in court or something. But one thing I want to make sure that I explain to you or tell you is that just any time in the future, whether it's you or anybody in your family who has a legal issue, keep in mind that there are so many different types of lawyers that you want to look for a lawyer who is skilled in the area that you're looking for. So for instance, let's just say for the sake of argument, you had an accident with your garage in your house or something like that. And if that's the case, then you need to find a lawyer who specializes in construction or specializes in building scaffolding or specializes in construction mistakes or something. It wouldn't help you to get a lawyer who does employment matters, or it wouldn't help you to work with a lawyer who defends doctors. And I find sometimes so many people will just grab a lawyer and say, oh, I've got a lawyer. But in actuality, you don't really have what you need. And you're going to end up paying that lawyer for, you're going to basically pay for them to get up to speed, as opposed to getting somebody who is actually skilled in that area. It's just going to be much more efficient, and you probably have a better chance of being defended well.
I have a question. Would you recommend any college majors for anybody that would want to be a lawyer?
Could you speak just a little louder? I can't hear you.
What would be like a college major that you would recommend to anyone that would want to be a lawyer?
So you don't have to, you can have any major. What I would say is that it really depends on what kind of lawyer you want to be. For instance, if you want to do, if you want to be a patent lawyer, let's say that you want to work and make sure that everybody's inventions are registered correctly and defended correctly, that somebody couldn't use anybody's inventions, unlawfully, then generally you're going to need an engineering degree, because you need to be able to understand engineering drawings of that design. You need, if it's, for instance, let's say it's a design of a microwave, you're going to have to understand the design build of that microwave to then determine what part of that microwave is able to be defended and protected under the law. It would be difficult for you to do that, not impossible, but it would be probably difficult to do that if you majored, say, in music. It may not necessarily be as easy. But as far as going to law school, just so you know, there is no prerequisite that you have to be able to get in law school. I met people who majored in English and they ended up being entertainment lawyers. So I think it really depends on what you want to be at the end. That might give you a little bit. If you, for instance, wanted to work in the White House, it's probably easier if you had a political science background than something else.
Hi, my name's Isaiah. I just had a question. With all the cases you've been through, what value do you think, when you said what makes a good lawyer, what do you think you use the most?
Did that one more time. I heard a little bit. I want to make sure I answer your question.
With all the cases you've had, what value you said how to be a good lawyer do you think you've used the most?
Oh, okay, that's a great question. Okay, so with all the cases I've had, let me go back to my thing to even remind myself. I think one for sure is good listener, because many times I find that a person will come and tell me part of the story, but I don't have enough of the story to be able to do anything for them. Or what happens a lot to me at Vans and other companies is someone will come in my office and say, I want to, let's say, we'll just make up a shoe. I want to do a new shoe, but they don't know whether or not they want to sell it in let's say they don't know whether or not they want to sell it just in North America, or do they want to sell it around the world? Or they don't know whether or not they want to make a limited run, or whether or not they want to make a very large run. They don't know if they're making it out of recycled material. So I have to listen to what they've given me and then try to kind of eke out additional information to be able to really take care of the issue. So I think good listener. Attention to details, I would say as well, because I do work with a lot of contracts, and a lot of times at the beginning of the process, everybody is getting along really well and we don't have any issues. But then later, we're not getting along as well. And so some of the details that I put in the agreement, when we have a disagreement, both sides can go to the contract and be clear about what we said about something. But if we don't have that in the contract, it just becomes much more difficult to kind of recreate what people meant. So I think attention to details for sure. I think those are probably the top two. I think the other things I definitely use, but I know consistently I use those. I think one thing I want to say too is on strong work ethic. I think that anything that you're going to do, I remember a while ago, a friend of my mother's wanted to have her daughter meet with me, and she was interested in going to law school. And at a certain point, she said, is law school hard? And I said, you need to focus less on whether it's hard and more on what you want to do. I think that a lot of things that we want are hard, but they're worth it because the energy and the persistence and all the things we learn along the way actually make us better people. I don't think that before I went to law school, I had never studied as much as I did in law school, and even more during the bar. But now as a lawyer, when I have nights that are very long, I'm used to that rigor because I've done it before. And so I would say to you, especially if you're interested in being a lawyer, that all you have to have is an absolute, I would say on your part, you just need to have that absolute certainty that you're going to make it happen. And the rest of it is just kind of details. There will be times that are hard. There will be times that are even, I don't know, you might look and say, how in the world do I get through this? But I think the most important thing you hold on to is your determination that you're going to do something. And whether you see people who look like you or whether you don't see people who look like you is really irrelevant in my mind, as it relates to your ability to be able to fulfill whatever it is that you put your mind to.
Hello, my name is Mustafa, and I'm interested in going into law. My first question was about going to law school and the reality of it compared to how the media represents it.
So tell me how you think the media represents it.
Certain shows like How to Get Away with Murder and stuff, they represent it to be some crazy experience with really hard school and working under a lawyer as a 1L and stuff like that.
Okay, so I loved How to Get Away with Murder. So I have that, at least we have that as a common reference point. So I think that How to Get Away with Murder, I think in one way was a little intense. I don't think it's normal for most law schools that you're doing that kind of intense work with a professor your first year. Usually you're doing clinics and that type of thing your second or third year. So, the way that they were all kind of together and so intensely focused on her cases and that type of thing, I thought that was a bit unrealistic because generally what happens your first year, your head is so far in the books trying to get your grades, because generally everybody works during the summer after your first year, and the jobs that you get during the summer are directly related to the grades that you get your first semester of your first year. So you're interviewing off your first semester, first year grades to be able to get a job for the summer. So I would say anybody who asks me the first year, the only thing you should be focused on is just studying the best way you know how, because at the end of your first semester, you have one exam. Generally, it's one exam that you sit in the room for, 5 to 6 hours, but that's your grade for the entire semester. So I would say your first year, generally, you don't have many extracurricular. It's really just all about the books. But the intensity that they kind of provided in that show, that's real. I think that the level of competition and just the consistent amount of work and reading and that type of thing, that's real for sure.
And then my second question was, how was it working under a federal judge?
Okay, so I was very blessed that my judge was an African-American woman. Her name was Judge Blanche Manning in the Northern District of Illinois, and she was one of the most beautiful people. She's no longer on the bench, but it was just a wonderful experience for me because she was so complimentary of my skills, but she was also just so kind. So as an example, there was one case that we had where there was an individual who was getting ready actually to go to law school, and his family had been kind of involved in a lot of crime. And as a result, he was in the car with his cousins when they, I don't even remember what they exactly did, but he was with them. And as a result, he got charged with some crimes. And as a result of what he had done, there are sentencing guidelines in the federal court, which basically are almost like, the easiest way to describe them, they're like a puzzle. So if the judge is seeking to kind of provide any kind of sentence, she has to follow the puzzle. She can't say, I'm completely throwing these to the wind and I'm going to give a different sentence. She doesn't have that latitude. So she gave him, she was so touched by the fact that he was trying to be different and go to law school that she gave him the least that she could give him. But that was still, I think, about 3 years in prison. And he wasn't able to go to law school. They rescinded his admission. And I was in the chambers when my judge had tears rolling down her eyes because she just was so upset that this had happened. And so I just saw a really good person who happened to be a judge. So for me, if anybody can do a clerkship, I would highly recommend it. I just think it's a wonderful way to see how the law works. And if you're lucky enough to get a really nice judge, it's a really, really nice introduction in terms of the law.
And my question for you is, what's the biggest case you ever had to do? And like, how did you manage to do that case?
Okay, the biggest case that I ever had was actually turned into a TV show. It was actually, I take that back, a TV movie with Matt Damon when I was clerking for my judge. And it involved a person who became an informant for the FBI. And there were a lot of pieces to it, but it actually ended up being a movie. And so if I had a hearing with the judge, there would be 50 people in the courtroom. It would be the attorneys for FBI, for CIA, for Department of Justice, for Homeland Security. I mean, it was just incredible. And so I think to your question of how did I handle it, my point of view on everything big is you kind of break it down in little pieces. And that's, if you're able to, which I said on my list, if you're able to prioritize, then you are clear about what things are much more important at what time versus another. You're not going to be able to do it all at the same time. But if you're able to break, it's kind of like they say, how do you eat an elephant bit by bit? It's kind of the same with anything that you're working on. When you're studying for your first year of law school, you're not going to be able to cram a week before classes. You have to sit down and think about all the reading you have to do and all the work you have to do, and you break it down into pieces of what you can get done every day. And I think that's really the secret, whether it's the case that I have with a judge or big cases or big issues that I have even at Vans. It's really just a matter of breaking them down in pieces and prioritizing so that you do a little bit at a time and then you're able to get it done.
Oh, hi, my name is Jason, and my question is, what are the different types of attorneys?
Jason, and you said, what are the different types of attorneys?
Yeah.
Like in terms of criminal versus civil, is that what you're talking about? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially, when you hear criminal, everything having to do with criminal lawyers is really based on, we have a criminal code, So all of the different activities that people are involved with, from arson to assault to robbery, all of those are under codes, and we have federal codes and we have state codes. So an attorney who's doing that type of work is essentially either defending people or they're working for the state or the federal government against people who are engaged in crime. The civil side is more having to do with trials and what have you, but the effect of those trials is not jail time, it's actual money. So that's why if you think, I don't know how many, this is some years back and you guys are very young, but if you think back a long time ago with, well, even we can use the more recent thing with George Floyd, there was a criminal element that ended up with policemen in jail. But then there was a civil element too, where the city of Minneapolis ended up paying his family for the things that he had wronged. So in that instance, there would be one kind of attorneys who are dealing with the issues of the police force. Then there's another group that's handling the money that ultimately comes to his family as a result of his death. Does that answer your question, Jason?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Elijah, and I had a question. Has there ever been a case to where you knew your defendant was lying and was wrong at the same time, but you still defended them?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And my oath, I had a situation where I was defending an employer, and she said that this employee had done all of these things wrong, and that was the reason why that employee was fired. And I knew when I started to ask different questions of that particular person that their story didn't add up and I didn't believe them. And so when I actually, when we had the hearing, I did speak to the employer on the side and say, you know, this doesn't make sense to me. You know, this part doesn't add up with this part. And if I'm seeing these things, you know, it's a good chance that the judge who is hearing this is going to see the same things. The part that I have as an ethical obligation as a lawyer is that I have to defend that employer. And so even though I'm listening and I hear things that don't make sense or I think are lies, my obligation is to defend her. And then afterwards, depending on the scenario, sometimes I've had situations where I've spoken to the judge afterwards if I feel like there's something that we should re-examine. I can never kind of sell my client out, but I can certainly raise some issues that I think the court should look at in more detail. But in that particular scenario, when I pointed out the issues and what have you, it ended up that she was fighting so hard to make sure that this person didn't get anything like unemployment or what have you. And then when we really talked it through, I convinced her that it wasn't really a good idea to be as fervent as she was because her story didn't make any sense. And she kind of folded and he ended up getting his unemployment. But it's not a place that I like to be. I'd much rather like to be in a place where I feel like the person I'm working with is telling me the truth. But my ethical obligation says, unless I formally withdraw and say that I'm not going to, you know, support or represent that person anymore, which is a process that I have to do with the courts. I haven't had anything that's like a situation where somebody like killed somebody and looked me in the face and said they didn't. I haven't had anything that dramatic, but I've definitely had situations in terms of some of my clients that I knew weren't telling me 100%.
Hi, my name is Maxwell. My question was, you were talking a lot about how like there's so many different kinds of lawyers, I mean, just all around. So if you were to switch up a certain category, is there like a whole new schooling or anything you have to go to, or is it like a smooth transition?
Oh, that's a really good question. So it depends on what it would be. So for instance, when I was talking earlier, there are certain specialties of law. Like for instance, there are people who are tax lawyers who actually go back and get another certificate in tax. Or, the patent is another area of specialty. So to answer your question, that's a really good question, because what it really speaks to is that for us as lawyers, there's different routes we can take. So if I were to work at a big firm, in the big firm, it's really important that you're specialized. So it would probably be rare that someone would be able to be focused in a lot of different areas. And you would ask why. It's because when I'm calling a big firm to help vans, I'm looking for a very specific area of specialty. So if I'm, let's say something as, here's an example. We've had a situation where some of the people who are participating in some of our contests were angry that there were transgender people participating because they said it wasn't fair. So when I'm looking for an attorney, I'm looking for somebody who's really specialized in competition, maybe has advised the Olympics. I need somebody who really has that expertise. So the firms generally have attorneys who are very, very specialized, almost to a really granular level. When you're working in a corporation like I am, your value is actually the opposite, that you know a lot of different things in a lot of different areas, because that's kind of how the corporation works. One day I might be dealing with a transgender situation. Another day I might be dealing with COVID. Another day I might be dealing with someone had an accident in one of our stores, so it's all over the place. So to answer your question, I would say that there are areas that are very closely aligned. Like, let's say that somebody was a lawyer who dealt with entertainers. They probably know a lot about how they secure that entertainer's rights. They probably know a lot about how do they keep other people from infringing on his rights. They probably know a lot about if that particular person is going to perform, what kind of contracts to protect those particular things. So where there are areas, I think, of the law where they're kind of similar, like you could say employment and labor unions are very close. I think those transitions are probably easier than if you're talking about a transition of someone who specialized in tax and now wants to do entertainment law. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sure.
So you were talking about how you thought the other girl was wrong. When doing that, when getting too involved, can you get in trouble? Or getting involved at all?
So you're saying the woman that I was representing that wasn't treating her employee right? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes.
So that's a really good question. So my obligation, I only can speak to the employer and I can make recommendations to her, but I can't speak to the employee because he's represented by counsel as well. So when two people each have their own attorney, me as an attorney cannot speak to that person alone. I can speak to that person with their attorney, or I can speak to their attorney alone. But if I had shared any of my concerns that I shared with the employer to the employee, yes, I would have gotten in trouble. One, because what I had a conversation to the employer about is covered under what we call an attorney-client privilege. So if I'm an attorney and I'm talking to somebody and they're my client, everything that goes on between the two of us, it's almost imagine like a large cloud goes over it and it's protected. And the only way that anybody can figure out what went on in those conversations is either if my client says she wants to break that privilege, or if for some reason the client has done something, there's a kind of a list of certain things that I can't protect. But other than that, that would never be anything that anybody else would be able to talk about. Now that the case is done and it's resolved, and I haven't told you the person's name, and I haven't told you the company, and I haven't told you the year, I can talk about it generally, but I could never say, this is the name of my client and this happened on such and such a day. That's still protected under attorney-client privilege. But if I had any of my conversations with her employee, that would have been a problem, yes. And if I had talked to that employee without talking to the attorney, that would have been a problem too.
Thank you.
Oh, sure.
All right, hey, my name is Will.
Yeah, I'm good. I don't have anything after this.
So
as
we
long as
learned
you guys
about
have
company culture
questions,
from
I'm here.
Dave. How does the Vans company culture translate into what you do on a daily basis?
Yeah.
Or do you think that matters? All right, hey, my name.
Oh, I think it matters a lot. That's a really good question. So the way that I think the company culture comes into play, and I'll say this specifically as an African-American woman, is that I've watched Vans, certainly after George Floyd and other things, to really try to be responsive, not only to our consumer, but to the people who work there, in terms of these issues of race and privilege. And we've had all kinds of speakers and what have you. But I'll tell you a specific area where it plays out is that in our department, we have people who are looking at all the advertisements that go out. We have to make sure that they're all compliant with the law. We have to make sure that they're saying the right things to the consumer. So there's a lot. If you see, for instance, a advertisement for a particular shoe, if you see information about a sweepstakes or a contest, all of that has gone through the legal department because we have to really make sure that everything is compliant with the law. But we had an incident where a picture came through our department, and one of the individuals on our team looked at it, and based on his background, it was very offensive. And I wouldn't have known that it was offensive because he and I are not in the same race. I wouldn't have known even the history of that picture. But because he did, he raised his hand and said, you know what, we can't use this. This is not only offensive to me, but it would be offensive to a large group of people. And as soon as he raised it, then everybody was like, oh, wow, you know, we didn't know that. This can't go forward. It was stopped. And we didn't print the picture. So for me, that is an example of our company culture, which is that it doesn't make sense for us to talk about how people should be treated if we're communicating externally in a way that's not respectful of everybody. So I think the company culture certainly requires us to look at everything and make sure that we're respecting everybody, which is part of our company culture. I think another part of the company culture is that we're off the wall. So, you know, we're not always going to abide by whatever the lines say. Sometimes we're doing things out of the box. And I think that's what makes my job fun as a lawyer, is that we're doing things, you know, like I want to say a year ago, we had a steel cube, and we had like 15 motorcycles riding inside the cube, trying to keep from hitting each other, and they're doing tricks and all that kind of stuff. That's not something that I would do at another company, but that kind of pushing the envelope is part of our culture. So I think it absolutely intersects with what we do as lawyers.
Hi, my name is Maya. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, Maya, I can hear you.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, like, can you compare a moment in your career where you felt like giving up into a moment where you felt like this is what I meant to do?
That's a good one. So one moment I can say that I felt like giving up was my second semester of my first year of law school. My father was diagnosed with cancer. And so I'm the oldest. My parents at that time were divorced. So I was going back and forth between law school and back to my father's state. He lived in Missouri, and I was going back and forth handling issues with the estate while I was still, you know, studying. So I was on the plane, you know, reading hundreds of pages and trying to keep up with everything that I needed to do. And I definitely remember there was a moment where I was kind of like in my apartment, and I just was like pretty much on my knees, like, how in the world am I going to ever do this? I was, and then my father eventually died my summer after first year. So just the, during the summer, it was really hard for me to think about how am I going to get the strength to go back. The last year was so hard. And so I definitely remember that. And then I think I remember distinctly, I'll never forget it, when it was graduation and I was standing, getting ready to go up and get my degree. And tears just started running down my face. And I remember this woman who I still to this day don't know who she was, but she looked at me and she said, go ahead, let those tears flow. You earned it. And I don't even know who she was, but I knew what I had been through to be able to graduate on time. I didn't think at certain points that was possible. And at points, family had said, maybe this is too much. Maybe you should wait. But I didn't give up. And so definitely, I would say that was probably the first time. And then I think there were times when I was clerking for my judge just to sit in the majesty of the court, where I was like, you know what, this is a good moment. So I definitely have had quite a few of those along the way.
My name's Mustafa. I had a really quick question to ask you. I'm someone who's really interested in going into law and stuff, and I was wondering if there's like any email or something that we could reach out to you and ask you any questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will give you my email. Any of you can reach out. I want to be, there's a lot of, I want to say to you, Mustafa, and everybody else who's interested, there are a lot of programs trying to get more minorities into the profession. And so there are groups that will look at you in undergrad. There are groups that you can even get into at this point. So definitely reach out to me. I'd be happy to jump on a phone and get a better sense of kind of what you're looking for. And then I can probably, if not me, I can connect you with some of my other friends in areas that might be closer to what you want to do for a living. But absolutely, you can use my, I'll give you my email. I'll send it to Jordan, and then Jordan, you can get it out to them. And then I'll give you my cell. You can feel free to use that as well.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Hello, my name is CJ.
Hi.
And my question is, what does a typical day for you look like?
Oh, that's a good question. So a typical day, I would say, it's a little different now that we're on Zoom because we're not working typically in the office. So prior to Zoom, I live in Los Angeles and our offices are in Costa Mesa. So a typical day for me before COVID was generally that I was up probably at about, say, on a good day when I was doing everything that I was supposed to. I'm usually up at about 4:30 to take like a exercise class at about 5:15. And then I'm usually in the car by like about 6:30. And then usually I get to the office around 8:30. Just because the commute is intense. And then I would usually work till about 6:30 and then head home and get home around 8:30. But now I would say that it's a little different because of Zoom. But in more detail, what I would say is that I would say I usually have quite a few calls during the day because now our calls are replacing the meetings that we would normally have. However, I think the part I like the most about my job is there's always something that comes from the side that I don't expect that suddenly becomes a priority. So I can be, thinking that this day I'm going to knock out a contract and then something will come from the side, like some kind of a meteor and knock all of that out of the way. It's been pretty much, I've had some wild days in my career. One time, when I was working for Avon, I came in the morning and we had 7 or 8 distribution facilities. So a distribution facility is a place where the people are basically filling boxes of your orders and getting them out to you. And so when I walked in that morning, there had been a dispute between 2 employees at one of our distribution facilities in Atlanta. and one had kidnapped the other with a gun, had her get into a car and threatened to do something to her. And so they were riding around Atlanta while I was trying to communicate with the police and FBI and what have you. So that's what I like about my job, is that that day I had no idea that was going to happen, but there's always something that's unexpected.
I just have one quick question for you. Can you hear me? Is there any time where you have like lost a case, or if you were to, like, how would you go about handling that? Like just a tough loss that.
Yes, I've had one. With one of my old companies, we had an individual who worked in a building, and he went to a certain part of the building and slept. We found that he had created a whole apartment in part of one of our distribution centers, and he was responsible for making sure that everything was working, the heat continued, the machines worked, and what have you. And we decided to take the case to trial, and the jury found that we were not right to terminate him for sleeping on the job. And that one was hard because in that particular scenario, we had video, where he would literally go in every day. He had a TV. It was like kind of this whole area that he had created, and he wasn't doing his job. But, it was hard. We made a difficult decision as to whether or not we should take it to trial. So it's never easy to lose. But in that particular scenario, you have to respect what the jury says, and that was the determination that they made.
Hello, my name is Davion, and hi. My question is, if you're in like court and you're defending the person that you're defending, is it like an emotional or physical test because of certain body languages and your emotions you have to keep in check?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. It can affect. It really depends on what the person is in front of the judge for. So in some instances, when I work for the judge, they would bring people from the jail. They would still be, in their jail attire, and some of them were very aggressive. So if they were aggressive or too aggressive, sometimes their hearings would be postponed because the judge wouldn't be able to listen to them. Or if they came in and they were very disrespectful to the judge, then sometimes that was an issue. In most instances, the judge would bend over backwards to try to hear the person despite their activity. But in some instances, from a safety issue, I remember one person who came very close to the judge and was trying to throw things and what have you at the judge. She uses her discretion to determine what is too much for the decorum of the court. And certainly, I would say that their behavior could affect whether or not she'll go forward with the hearing. But if someone, I think it would depend on why they're acting that way. You have some people with mental illness or something like that. And I think in those instances, the judge would not use that against the ultimate determination that she made, but it's certainly something that she would take into account. But I don't know that it would depend on the circumstances, but I think I don't know that it would always mean that someone not acting a particular way would have a direct effect on the ultimate determination of the judge.
Ms. Adrienne, everybody, let's give a hand and let her know that we appreciate your time, you and Jordan. Thanks for everything.
Oh, sure. And I'll pass on my stuff to Jordan.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice meeting all of you.
Everybody, do we have questions? Remember that question that I told y'all to put on the beginning on your notepad?
What I wanted to take from it was how to be a lawyer, and what I got from it was just 4 years of college, any degree, 3 years of law school, and you gotta take the bar exam and pass in your state.
I mean, what I wanted to get from it at first was what kind of lawyers existed, just because at first, it doesn't seem like a broad category. And then what I got from it was the exact opposite. There was a bunch of options, and then the skills that you actually have to have for each kind of category of it.
I was just wondering, like, what do lawyers do? And I found out that lawyers don't just stay in the courtroom. They actually do a lot of different things, and they're in a lot of different fields, really. And they're just helping out everybody around the world, not just with legal reasons, but also with personal reasons as well.
Right. I didn't know David Stern was considered a lawyer. You know what I mean? So lawyers do a lot of those things that kind of just keep everything function in an orderly process. So, you know what I mean? So things can work as is. Anybody else? And it doesn't have to be as far as like what you got from it, just anything dope that you think that you learned.
One thing I like that she says, like, when you're like going into like your career path, don't think about like, is it hard, or like, is it like, am I gonna get through this? Just focus on your end goal and just try to work hard.
My biggest addition, or what I want to add in, is a big round of applause to you all. Y'all did an amazing job. So it started off a little slow. Like the first time, I hope this is button on, right? It's about to fall off. But when we first asked for who had questions, everybody was a little hesitant to go up. But you all just asked like 40 minutes worth of questions. That's amazing, and they were deep and impactful questions. Like I think she even acknowledged it on several fronts that these are good questions that are way beyond surface level. So before anything else, I want to give you all kudos because that was dope. We all sat back here like, these are some great questions that you're asking. So y'all dug deep. Y'all asked them. That means y'all are paying attention and that y'all actually got something out of it. So man, beyond that portion of it, I just want to give all y'all some praise because that was dope.
Can I add on to that? One thing that I know we all heard her talk about how being a good listener was such a critical thing for being a lawyer. You'll notice that if you ask anybody who's successful in any space, they will say that being a good listener is one of the most important things. And so the fact that y'all asked so many questions, but more importantly, the type of questions that you ask displays how you are listening. So you heard her say like, that was a good question, that was a good question. I feel like whenever you're interacting with somebody, one of the biggest honors you can give them is to ask them engaging questions because it shows that one, you are listening, but two, that you care. And so like one piece of advice or one thing that somebody told me that always stuck with me is that the smartest people are not the people who have the most answers, it's the people who have the most questions. And I think that perspective, not only in this program, but just as you move forward, will be something that takes you very far, and it takes pressure off you because you don't have to be a know-it-all. But if you're willing to ask, there will always be somebody who's willing to reach out and help you. It'll make the journey a lot more fun. So again, shout out to y'all.
Hello, welcome to the Haley and
Isaiah
show. Okay. Today we're just going to be talking about a few things that happened today.
Yep. All right, so we met this really nice lady. We met both Jordan and we met Miss Adrienne, was it? Yep. Miss Adrienne is a lawyer. And what we learned from her today was how to become a lawyer. She told us that you need to go to college for 4 years, no matter the degree. You got to go to 3 years of law school, and then you got to take that bar exam and you stay and pass it.
And she also told us a lot of interesting stories about just her storyline and how she became a lawyer.
She also mentioned to us that the qualities that you need. She told us that you have to be a great listener. You have to be willing to listen, pay attention to those little details because it can affect the case entirely. And she just said you always got to be willing to keep working, to have that strong work ethic even when things do get a little bit hard or challenging for yourself.
And she also talked about the misconceptions that people have on lawyers and court and things like that.
You ready?
Go ahead.
She told us that it's not always like the TV shows like we see, like How to Get Away with Murder or the other TV show is called All Rise. She told us that it's just not always like that, but some things they do get correct. And yeah, that's kind of what we learned from her today.
And she also said that being able to listen is the best quality I think she said she had.
Yeah, and we're both great at that, so it's big dubs.
Yeah. I like that the program is like very hands-on, and I'm a hands-on learner, and I just like that. It's just like a good vibe surrounded by it, with it being hands-on and all that good stuff.
What I like about the program is one, I like all the other 19 technically students that I'm with, but I also like that it's not necessarily like school. Like we could come from school and be here and it's not feel like school. Like we can eat, we can talk, we can laugh, we got iPads. We don't get those at school. And I just really enjoy that we all really are a family and we build bonds.
Comfortable.
Yeah, I like that.